The year was 1939. Tensions between Germany and what would become the Allied forces were at an all-time high. Even after the Anschluss of Austria and the annexation of Czechoslovakia, war seemed inevitable. For a nation such as Poland, the straits were dire. The Nazi regime was hell-bent on conquering the country. To make matters worse, they weren't the only ones eyeing up the Poles' fertile farmland. An old enemy to the east, eager to reclaim the territory once owned by the former Russian Empire for much of the 19th century, and set on revenge after being humiliated at the Battle of Warsaw, had just struck up a deal with the Third Reich, and were no doubt making plans for a joint invasion. The Molotov-Ribbentrop non-aggression pact sealed Poland's fate, and with it, the fate of Europe for the next 6 years. On September 1st, German forces invaded, and 16 days later, Soviet forces followed. Britain and other countries openly condemned the attack and vowed to send aid, an ultimately toothless threat, thus formally starting the Second World War. What happened next is well known. The systematic killing of Jews and political prisoners both in the extermination camps, and mass executions on an unprecedented scale by the Nazi occupiers is documented in detail. However, similar atrocities against the Polish people were committed by the Soviet Union, atrocities that have gone unpunished and are still shrouded in mystery nearly 75 years later. Due to internal politics, cover-ups, lies, scandals, betrayals, fears, and outright incompetence, the CCP was not only able to carry out a genocide, but was never attempted to be stopped nor punished for their actions. The blatant disregard for justice apparent here calls into question the very foundation of the Nuremberg trials, and more broadly, the UN's ability to dispense judgment as a whole. There has been much debate whether the actions of the Red Army were considered a genocide. Most would agree that a genocide can be determined by two factors: mass murder / displacement / internment of a people, and a racial / ethnic motivation. But these are easily provable given the complex history between Poland and Russia, both in its monarchical and communist forms. Nowhere is this clearer than in the Katyn massacre. Katyn, a quiet forest some 20 kilometers from the city of Smolensk in the modern-day Russian Federation, was the scene of a massacre of Polish officers at the hands of the NVKD, Soviet secret police. It was discovered by the advancing Wehrmacht in 1943 and used by Joseph Goebbels to help justify the invasion of the USSR. Nowadays, the Katyn massacre refers to a large number of extrajudicial killings in and around the forest that took place between 1939 and 1941. The reasoning behind most of these murders was simple: control. These men were mostly members of the Polish Home Army, an underground organization loyal to the government in exile, high-ranking Polish government officials, or simply well-known patriotic Poles. In order to prop up the Marxist puppet government, these people were deemed threats and had to be eliminated en masse. Snozner Bidienda, founder of the Libre Institute and longtime advocate for Polish-American relations, said, "By destroying significant and influential members of Polish national group, the Soviet Union irrevocably compromised the ability of the remaining part of this protected group to survive. Therefore, the Soviet Union acted with specific intent to destroy the whole Polish national group on the Polish territory incorporated to the Soviet Union, thus proving intent needed to constitute a genocide." With the launch of Operation Barbarossa in 1941, the Soviet Union reluctantly joined Britain, France, and later the United States to form what is now known as the Allies. Technically, this meant that the USSR was now allied with Poland, but this did not stop Stalin's genocidal policies towards the Poles. The true intention of the communist regime reared its ugly head again during the Warsaw Uprising of 1944. Organized by the government in exile and carried out by the members of the Home Army, the uprising was supposed to only last a few days before the Red Army reached the city, thereby finally liberating it from 5 years of Nazi occupation. In fact, Soviet Marshal Rokossovsky's armies had advanced to a mere 9 miles from the city the day the uprising began, and were on pace to reach the city by August 3rd, 1944, but all Russian advancement was stopped abruptly. Stabbed in the back yet again, nearly 200,000 Poles would pay the ultimate toll for this treachery by the end of the uprising on October 3rd. Irina Mukina said it best: "The failure of the Warsaw Uprising became a symbol of the Soviet Union's determination to turn Central Europe into its sphere of influence. even if Soviet domination came at the price of thousands of lives. The CCP cared not for the Poles themselves, only for their land. This revelation would create the foundation of mistrust of the communist government in post-war Poland. There are many tragic tales of heroism throughout the war in Poland, but the story of Witold Pilecki stands out. Before, during, and after World War II, Pilecki was a patriot for his country. A cavalryman, he purposely interned himself in the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp and gathered information on the war crimes of the Nazis, then successfully escaped to rejoin the Home Army. His expertise was crucial in the execution of the Warsaw Uprising, but he had to slip back into the shadows after the failure of that operation. That should have been the end for Witold, but his heroics put him on the top of Stalin's death list. Swedish power metal band Sabaton captures the scene of his execution at the hands of a kangaroo court at the bridge of their song Inmate 4859. The title itself a reference to Witold's prisoner number during his stint in the concentration camp. Sent to a prison where the heroes are judged as traitors, accused of treason by his own, sentenced by countrymen under pressure of foreign influence, men he once fought to free. By turning former friends against each other and hunting down heroes to demoralize the already battered and broken populace, the Soviets continued their reign of terror long after the war, and ultimately achieved their goal of the conquest of Europe. But try as they might, Stalin could never truly conquer and kill the will of the Polish people. When interviewed about serving in the Polish underground, Andrzej Kiska, a man who had lived through the war and evaded communist imprisonment by hiding in the woods until 1961, said, "For Poland, we were dying. We were tortured, we were imprisoned and degraded. Even though my heart is aching from sorrow, I don't regret those 29 years that were taken away from me. I acted as my honor as a Pole, as a soldier dictated. I am proud of it." Andrzej's mentality was one echoed by thousands of Poles, even Pilecki himself. Through genocide, through war, through occupation, the Polish people endured. It is a sight to behold such a small nation persevere through such hardship, and hopefully, this is the last time such a maelstrom of tragedies ever befalls any country. What did the Allies do about this injustice, both during and after the war? The British trained Polish commandos harbored the government in exile and declared war on Germany when they were invaded, so the Allies must have condemned such an attack on a people and demanded retribution, correct? Even Germany helped Polish prosecutors procure documents after the fall of the USSR. Sizek notes, access was granted to 26 volumes of archival documents containing 400 documents each, which were captured by the Germans in 1941. Old enemies were willing to put aside their differences to try to dispense justice, so therefore the Allies must have done enough to punish the Soviets, right? The sad reality is too little was done and far, far too late. Britain and France did not send any aid to Poland after the German-Soviet invasion, and were far too concerned with the well-being of themselves to see the bigger picture of a global conflict. While it is true that Churchill absolutely despised communism, Stalin, and the USSR, they still entered into an alliance with a nation that violated not only Polish sovereignty, but occupied Finnish, Estonian, Latvian, and Lithuanian soil under the guise of protection. The most damning evidence of the Allies' refusal to act comes from the post-war period, where the Allies allowed the USSR to serve as a major power in the United Nations. Politically, it was smart. Tensions with the Soviet Union were high, and to deny them power in post-war Europe would have reignited conflict and disrupt the peace that everyone had worked so hard to earn. Yet was it moral? If the UN had held the Soviets on trial, what would have happened? Is making a deal with the devil worth it in the end if it means peace? Is it truly even peace if it comes at the cost of thousands of innocent lives? The answer to this question is quite outside the scope of this video, but what is known as Britain's interaction with the aforementioned Witold Pilecki. Witold tried to send a report of his findings to the British in a desperate bid for aid. The entire report can be read on archive.org, translated into English, and features quite vivid and brutal descriptions of the Holocaust and the operations of the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp. After reading the report, the British disregarded it as over-exaggerated, and it was discarded. This gross incompetence should help one come to a decision on whether or not the Allies did enough to help Poland. In the end, what does this all mean? Most of the perpetrators of these crimes are long dead, so why should we hold them responsible if they can't be punished? The answer is simple. Hitler and the Nazi Party were tried for their crimes against humanity at Nuremberg, and the judicial ruling made there formed the basis for trial of international war crime laws under the newly formed United Nations. The USSR's failure to admit their own crimes, and to a lesser extent, some of the Allied nations, calls into question the legitimacy of the UN's court system. If anyone in power can get away with war crimes, what is the point of having a tribunal? If we can't hold ourselves accountable for our wrongdoings, are we any better than those we condemn for doing the same? The outright hypocrisy highlights the ultimately toothless nature of the United Nations, begging the question of whether or not this organization is just another League of Nations with a different name.